מחשבה תחילה אוי לך דיידי לקראת סקאלה פני שבס נקבלה אוי לך דיידי לקראת סקאלה פני שבס נקבלה אוי לך בני שבס נקבלה אוי לך דיידי לקראת סקאלה בני שבס נקבלה. A good Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. We're so excited. Shabbos is coming in a few hours, and this is the first Shabbos of the Shabbos Challenge here at AT. Let me pause that, and we hope you will join us. There's a role for everybody in the Shabbos Challenge, whether you're Jewish or not. Unplug for 25 hours from sunset tonight till nightfall tomorrow night. Why not? Just let go of the phone and the computer and the social media and the news and the bad news and the worst news. Just let it go. Sit tight with God, with your loved ones, with your soul. Take a real chance to refresh and rejuvenate. It's such a blessing. I can't tell you how special it is if you haven't done it before. Now, if you're Jewish, here we are learning Torah and Talmud together every day. So if you're not Shomer Shabbos yet, take a step in that direction. Not only unplug, but make sure you're lighting Shabbos candles. Make a bracha, make a blessing over the wine. You're saying Kiddush. Maybe you could have a challah if you're not already doing that, so you can make a motzi, a blessing over the bread, and have a special Friday night dinner. It's so good to have Shabbos in your life. And then we had a post about it earlier in the week on the Accidental Talmudist Facebook page, and you'll see there some tips from Nina of what to fill all this beautiful Shabbos time with if it's not going to be technology. All right. Let's light up the darkness. Some people ask, well, I have special situations in my life. I can't do this part or I can't do that. It's not all or nothing. Maybe eventually you'll be able to, really make Shabbos in a kosher Shomer Shabbos way. But until then, every step up the ladder is a wonderful step. Do what you can. You will appreciate the peace of Shabbos so much. Who is with us as we get it going on a Friday afternoon? Tom in PA, Sharon in New Jersey, Yehudit in South Carolina. Bree wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom U'Mevorach, a Shabbos of peace and blessing. John in Maine, Marjorie in Georgia, Paul in Chicago, PK in Colorado, Rebecca in LA, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in Berkeley, where I've just been accepted on an AmeriCorps summer fellowship with the Oakland United School District. Mazel tov, well done. They're lucky to have you, Bill. Have a wonderful experience and bring a lot of inspiration to those kids. Leanne in the UK, welcome from across the pond. Allison in North Carolina, Don in Arizona, Randy in Florida, Paul in Minneapolis. Nancy in North Carolina, Sarah in LA, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, James in Indianapolis, Rochelle in Modesto. Paula says she's going to unplug for 25 hours. Sarah says Shabbat Shalom. Gisette in Colorado, and a lot of people wishing congratulations to Bill. Lynn in North Texas, and Seraphim in Sacramento. Welcome, everybody. We are opening a new chapter here in Tractate Yoma, the Laws of Yom Kippur, the 6th volume of the Talmud. We're starting chapter 5. We're about halfway through, maybe even a little more than halfway through. So we should be finishing this, right? right, Yoma is not a two, right, this is not 2 volumes. And how many pages are there? Like 80 some, right? 88. So 88 pages here in Tractate Yoma, and we are on page 47. Daf Mem Zion, page 47, opening chapter 5 with the first Mishna. Now, we've been working our way through the Yom Kippur observance as it was done when the temple was standing in Jerusalem. Now in chapter 5, we're going to get a little more specific with the service of the incense. Since we always like to start with a little Torah before we get into the Talmud. But today, let's just read the law from the Torah that everything that we'll be reading about in this chapter in the Talmud is based on. So this is from Leviticus 16:12 through 19, directly applicable to what we're learning today. And he shall take a coal pan full of coals of fire from off the altar from before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense, beaten small, and bring it within the veil, right? So within the veil means into the Holy of Holies. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, and the incense cloud shall cover the ark cover that is upon the testimony, and he will not die. So this was what for the tabernacle and the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant was inside the Holy of Holies. And so he could fulfill this obligation to come with the coals and the super finely ground incense into the Holy of Holies, and then put the incense on the coals and fill it with this beautiful aromatic cloud inside the Holy of Holies, that he not die when he's before the Ark and the Ark cover. In the second temple, this is one of the differences between the first and second temple. The ark was hidden away before the destruction of the first temple, and it's been lost ever since. Raiders of the Lost Ark. That ark was lost at the end of the first temple. So the second temple had a Holy of Holies, and the high priest entered there with tremendous reverence only on Yom Kippur. But the Ark of the Covenant itself was not in that room, and that would occasion certain differences in the observance, as we'll see in this chapter 5. Continuing the verses from the Torah, that he not die. And he shall take the blood of the bull, and he shall sprinkle it with his finger upon the ark cover to the east, and before the ark cover he shall sprinkle 7 times from the blood with his finger. So we've already talked about that he has to slaughter the bull, and the bull is an atonement for the priest, his family, and his fellow priests. And he shall slaughter the goat of the sin offering that is for the people, and bring its blood within the veil, and he shall do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it upon the ark cover and before the ark cover. And now we start to see why that this beautiful and complex choreography of what the high priest had to do on Yom Kippur, why he didn't just, do the service in the Holy of Holies and finish it, and then come out and do the service of the bull and finish it, and the service of the goats of Yom Kippur and finish that. Instead, he starts one thing and then goes to another, and he's constantly in the middle. He's multitasking. He's in the middle of 3 or 4 simultaneous rituals, going back and forth from one element of the ritual to another ritual and doing that element. Why? For example, as we'll see, when he enters the Holy of Holies, he has to bring the incense and the coals that he's going to put the incense onto. So that is going to fill his hands. It's a very practical matter. He's going to have the incense in one hand. I'm holding up my right hand where you'd think it would be, but in fact, the incense is going to end up in his left hand, as we'll see. The coals in his right hand. Where's he carrying, the blood of the bull or the blood of the goats? He's got no limbs left. He's not an octopus. So he's going to go in there, start the incense service, come back out, then deal with the bull or the goats, and then go back into the Holy of Holies. And it's just a very practical matter why he has to go back and forth from one service to another. And he shall make atonement for the sacred place because of the impurities of the children of Israel and because of their transgressions, even all their sins, and so shall he do for the tent of meeting that dwells within them in the midst of their impurity. And so we see that, let me just turn that off, that some of what he has to do is based on bringing an atonement for impurities that relate directly to the avoda, the service done during the year of the priests in the temple. Some offerings were brought in a state of tumah by mistake. Some people entered the temple in a state of impurity by mistake. And so part of the atonement of Yom Kippur is to make an atonement for all of that kind of impurity that made its way into what's meant to be the holiest place in the world, the Temple Mount. And the temple courtyards, the temple courtyards. And there shall be no man in the tent of meeting when he goes in to make an atonement in the sacred place until he comes out and has atoned for himself and for his household and for the assembly of Israel. So when he's in the Holy of Holies, there should be no one in the sanctuary, which is between him and the courtyard of the priests. And he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it. And he shall take, so that's the incense altar, which sits in the sanctuary. It also may have become impure during the year at some point. He's going to make an atonement for that. And so that happens not in the Holy of Holies, but in the sanctuary. And he shall, where am I? And he shall take the blood of the bull and the blood of the goat and put it on the corners of the altar, meaning the incense altar, and he shall sprinkle of the blood upon it with his fingers 7 times and cleanse it and sanctify it from the impurities of the children of Israel. And then another shorter verse from Exodus 30, verses 1 and 2 and 10, and you shall make an altar to burn incense. This is the incense altar. Of acacia wood you shall make it. A cubit shall be its length, and a cubit its breadth, and it shall be square. And 2 cubits shall be its height, and its corners shall be 1 piece with it. So it's a much smaller altar than the main altar, the Mizbeach, that was outside in the courtyard where the animal offerings are brought, and that we said was like the size of a room where the priest could walk around and there were multiple fires burning at the top of it. The incense altar, which is inside the sanctuary, is like this by this. It's just for burning incense, and that incense is burned every day when the temple is standing in the morning and the afternoon. And Aaron shall make atonement upon its corners once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. Once a year he shall make atonement for it throughout your generations. It is most sacred to the Lord. Those are the verses that we are going to be referencing as we work our way through chapter 5. Now let's get into the first Mishna of chapter 5. They brought out the spoon and the coal pan to the high priest so he may perform the service of the incense. And he scoops his handfuls from the incense and places it into the spoon. This is already a little bit confusing. He's scooping from the spoon and he's placing into the spoon. And so basically what's happening here is we have 2 different spoons, right? So the priest has to make a scooping. We're not going to cover, today's page is rather long. We're not going to be doing all of it. We're going to be doing most of the first half of it. But in the second half, the part we're not covering specifically, there's going to be a comparison made to the high priest scooping out the incense on Yom Kippur, compared with priests during the rest of the year scooping out flour for the meal offerings, which are brought on a regular basis in the temple. Meal offerings meaning flour. Flour was brought onto the altar. And when flour is brought, it was a very, very specific way that the flour would be scooped out of the container where it was, where the priest would use these 3 fingers. I mean, it's like, this funny symbol. I don't even know exactly what it means. Different people use it for different things. But the high priest, this wasn't a symbol. This was a technique of scooping flour with these 3 fingers and then using the thumb and the pinky to sort of, swipe away the excess. And then this was considered a handful of flour. Okay, so there's going to be some comparisons. It's certainly not going to be the same thing. With the incense of Yom Kippur, they're going to bring a container of incense to him in a spoon or like a vessel with a handle, some kind of a ladle that has more than what he can take. Then he's going to, take the scoop with his hand, because that's part of the commandment in the Torah. And then he's not going to carry it in his hand when he goes to the Holy of Holies, while he's also carrying the coal pan. That's considered impractical. So having scooped the amount of incense in his hand, he has to do it with his hand. But having done that, then he's going to put it into another spoon, which is the spoon or the ladle that he's going to use to carry that incense into the Holy of Holies with him on Yom Kippur. The high priest with large hands fills the spoon with incense in an amount corresponding to the large size of his hands. And the high priest with small hands fills the spoon with incense in an amount corresponding to the small size of his hands. And this was the measure of the spoon. It was made to correspond to the size of his hands. And then he took the coal pan in his right hand and the spoon in his left. And here we have an explanation, the law, the halacha. The spoon and the coal pan. A spoon and a vessel filled with very fine incense is brought out to the high priest. He scoops a handful of incense, which he then places in the spoon. Next, he takes the coal pan in his right hand and the spoon in his left. And then we'll talk about why, which is the right hand and which is the left. But this idea that they bring him a vessel, okay, so there's only one spoon, but they bring him a vessel, a container of incense. He takes his scoop out of it, and it's a handful according to who is the high priest. Some high priests had big hands, some high priests had small hands, but according to the measure of that particular high priest, they had a spoon ready for him that would receive the amount that is his handful, and that's what he's going to carry into the Holy of Holies, along with the gold coal pan, as we've discussed, the special coal pan made of special reddish gold that was only used on Yom Kippur. The Gemara. The Gemara expresses surprise at the statement of the Mishna. In an earlier Mishna, the rabbi already taught that the high priest must bring the coal pan. He takes a coal pan and ascends to the top of the altar and rakes and descends. So why does the Tana, right? I'm saying rabbi, but the Tana, meaning a rabbi of the Mishnah, why does the Tana mention the taking of the coal pan again? And the Gemara explains, we already covered that, right? So we're working our way through the observance of Yom Kippur, and we already talked about that he takes coals in the coal pan, the special coal pan of Yom Kippur. Why is it mentioned again here in chapter 5? And the Gemara explains, there in chapter 4, the Mishnah dealt with a coal pan of burning coals. Here, the Mishnah is referring to the coal pan of incense, which he would later scoop out. As it was explicitly taught in a Baraisa, they brought out an empty spoon for him from the chamber of vessels and a coal pan heaped with incense from the chamber of the house of Avtinas. Okay, so the vessel that they use to bring, more incense than he needs, from which he'll take his handfuls, is technically a coal pan, right? It's in the shape of a coal pan. And the Mishnah taught, he scoops his handfuls from the incense and places it into the spoon. The high priest with large hands fills the spoon with incense corresponding to the large size of his hands, and the high priest with small hands fills the spoon corresponding to the small size of his hands. And that's the measure of the spoon, according to the size of his hands. Now the Gemara asks, why do I need a spoon on Yom Kippur? After all, the Merciful One states, and he shall take a coal pan full of coals of fire from off the altar from before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. That we just read that before, Leviticus 16:12. This verse suggests that the handfuls are brought by hand rather than in a vessel. The Gemara answers, the high priest uses a spoon because it is impossible to perform the service otherwise. And the Gemara elaborates, and what should we do? Let him bring in a coal pan and then bring in the incense? And the merciful one states one act of bringing for the coals and the incense, and not 2 acts of bringing. So the Gemara is asking, well, it says 2 handfuls. So why doesn't the priest just go like this with both hands, fill that up with incense, and walk into the Holy of Holies with it? But if he does that, how's he carrying the coal pan that has burning coals in it? How's he going to carry that? You might say, well, maybe he can kind of like put the handle between 2 fingers while he's got this cup thing going, but then he doesn't have his full attention on those 2 handfuls. He can't do it. And the Gemara answers, now the Gemara suggests, well, instead, so then they said, so maybe he just takes the handfuls into the Holy of Holies, puts it down on something, and then goes out and brings the coals in. And said, no, because the verse said he enters with both things at the same time. He doesn't make 2 trips, according to the Torah. Right, the high priest uses a spoon because it is impossible to perform it otherwise. As what should he do? Let him bring in a coal pan and then the incense? But the merciful one states 1 act of bringing for the coals and the incense, not 2 acts of bringing. So instead, let him take the incense by his handfuls and place the coal pan on top of his 2 handfuls and enter. So maybe he could have the incense in his 2 hands cupped like this, and then the coal pan on top. Yeah, it's made out of gold. As I understand, gold conducts heat very well. So this thing would be really hot and sitting right on top of his hands. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Could there be insulation on the bottom of the coal pan to protect his hands, and then the coal pan sits just on top of the incense? Would that make sense? This suggestion is also impractical, as when he arrives there in the Holy of Holies, what should he do? I mean, you could have his hands filled with incense. You could put the coal pan on top of that. Okay. And then he walks inside the Holy of Holies. He has to be there alone. Nobody can help him. What's he going to do now? Where's he going to put this ladle with the coal pan? How's he going to put it down? He's got no limbs to work with. He's not an octopus. Where am I? What should he do? How can the high priest put down the coal pan where it is? So instead, let him take the coal pan in his teeth and lower it. So he goes in with the coal pan on top of the incense. So when he gets in the Holy of Holies, now the Gemara is suggesting, so let him pick it up with his teeth and put it down. I mean, we don't have to consider that very long and hard. That's just not going to work. That is not practical. But the reason is not given. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, he could learn how to do it. I mean, if he really had to move the coal pan with his teeth, he could learn how to do that. Why do we not let him do that? Now, before a king of flesh and blood, one would not be moving one vessel with his teeth while he holds some other stuff in his 2 hands, because it's disrespectful to be moving vessels with your teeth in front of a king of flesh and blood. All the more so, one would not act in this manner before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. So the Gemara concludes, therefore, it is impossible for the high priest to behave in any other way, and since it is impossible to act in any other manner, he acts as we find with regard to the sacrifices of the princes during the dedication of the tabernacle. On that occasion, the princes brought spoons filled with incense, 1 golden spoon of 10 shekels full of incense. So we saw that just a few weeks ago in the weekly Torah portion, or was it last week? When the tabernacle was dedicated for the first time in the wilderness, and each of the tribes sent a tribute on behalf of their tribe, and it was the tribal leader, the prince of the tribe, who came, and he brought all kinds of gifts. Everybody's offering was the same. The 12 tribes brought the same offering. But one of the gifts that was brought was a golden spoon filled with incense, not handfuls of incense. The Mishna taught that the high priest took the coal pan in his right hand and the spoon in his left hand. And the Gemara questions this arrangement by citing a well-known maxim. The native is on the ground and the stranger is in the heavens. In other words, this is the opposite of what one would expect. You would think that in one's own country, the natives, have the power and the stranger has less power. In other words, that would be the normal thing. But so often we find that the stranger somehow gets more honor than the native. Why does, in this case, why is the opposite happening of what we would expect? In other words, what's important when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies? He's carrying incense and hot coals. You would think it's the incense that is the important thing. That's what's going to be burned and produce this beautiful cloud. That's what's so expensive. Hot coals are hot coals. They come from the altar, but they're just hot coals. And as we saw, once they're removed from the altar, they're no longer considered fire of the altar. Now it's just the fire that's going to be used for this. So why doesn't he carry the incense in his right hand? Because normally in the ancient world, the right hand was considered a position of greater honor than the left. Why doesn't he carry the incense in the right hand? And the Gemara explains, the service is performed in this manner for reasons of comfort. Again, practicality. As this coal pan is greater in weight than the incense spoon, since it holds coals, and that spoon of incense weighs less. And even when the two of them are of equal weight, when the spoon contains 3 kav of incense, like the action of Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, right? Remember, it's the amount of incense in the spoon is based on the size of the hands of the high priest who is serving that day. So it happened that there was a high priest who had huge hands. So when he went in, the incense spoon actually weighed as much as the coal pan, the coals in the coal pan. So you think, okay, well, in that case, where the incense is the same weight as the coals, he would carry the incense in his right hand. His name was Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, so we're going to be talking more about him. Nevertheless, this coal pan is hot, and it must be held carefully in the right hand, and that spoon of incense is cold, and it is easily carried in the left hand. So at all times, even when the incense spoon was big and heavy, the coal pan went in the high priest's right hand when he entered the Holy of Holies, and the incense in his left, for practical reasons. Now, since the Gemara has mentioned Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, it discusses him further. They said about Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, and Kimhis is a woman's name. Normally, these rabbis, like Elisha ben Abuya, or, well, he's a bad example, but, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, or Yishmael the son of Elazar. It's always the sage mentioned the son of his father. But here is a high priest who's also a rabbi, so he's also a sage, and his name is given Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Kimhis, his mother. Why is his mother accorded this great honor? We're going to find out. So they said about Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis that his hands were so large that he would scoop up 4 kav, which he would hold by his handfuls, a big volume. And he would say, all the women selected the best they could for their children, but the selection of my mother rose to the roof. In other words, my mother chose the best. Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis is referring to himself as he matured to a great height and stature. Some say he was referring to his mother's selection of flour, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Bar Yonasan, as Rabbi Bar Yonasan said that Rabbi Yechiel said, flour is beneficial and healthy for the sick. And since his mother ate this flour when she was pregnant with him, her son grew heartily. So what he's basically saying is, I got very lucky in the article of genes, right? He just got great genes, and so he ended up being very, very large. He was tall and with huge hands, and it was a benefit to him to be big. And some say that this reference to selection is a euphemism for semen, in accordance with a statement of Rabbi Abahu, as Rabbi Abahu raised a contradiction between 2 verses. It is written, 2 Samuel 22:40, for you have girded me, vatazreni, with strength for battle. And it is written in a parallel verse, Psalms 18:33, who girds me, Hama Ezreni, with strength. What is the difference between these two expressions? It's like two different words or two different forms of the same word, that you have girded me with strength. And David said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, you selected me, Zeritani, with the best drop of the liquid that my mother absorbed from my father, with which you fashioned me, Zeraztani, within her. And this accounts for the variant forms of this expression. Again, it's this idea that his mother chose her husband well, and between his mother and his father, he just got great genes and ended up being very large. But not just large, he also merited to become the high priest. And he just had a lot of opportunities in life, and he's being humble. It's like, I didn't do anything myself. Of course he did. He had tremendous merit, but he's giving the merit to his mom, that she chose well and she brought him up well, and he's just passing along the credit. Now the Gemara continues to discuss Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis. They said about Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, once he was talking to a certain Arab in the market on Yom Kippur, and a drop of spittle sprayed from the Arab's mouth onto the clothes of Rabbi Yishmael, who was the high priest at the time. And this spittle rendered him ritually impure by rabbinic law, like the ritual impurity of a Zav, preventing him from serving in the temple. And his brother Yeshivav entered and served as high priest on that day in his stead. And consequently, their mother, Kimhis, saw two of her sons serving as high priests on a single day. Now, let's take a step back here. There's a few things that don't quite make sense. First of all, in terms of the spittle of the Arab, it happened to be an Arab. The point is that it was a non-Jew, and that as they were talking together, just a little bit of that spittle landed on him, and by rabbinic decree, that renders you ritually impure because you don't know where that person has been. So, as a matter of caution, now he's tameh. Because it's Yom Kippur, there's not going to be time for him to become purified, to immerse in the mikveh, etc., before he can resume his duties and do everything else that he has to do on Yom Kippur. That's why we have a deputy high priest who can step in at a moment's notice if for some reason the high priest becomes disqualified on Yom Kippur. In this case, the deputy high priest was his brother, and so their mother merited to see both of her sons serve as high priest on the same day. But the question has to be asked, why was he in the marketplace where he could encounter a non-Jew on Yom Kippur? The high priest is super busy on Yom Kippur. He's got so much to do. What's he doing out there in the marketplace? And so we have a note here, according to the Jerusalem Talmud. So this is in the Jerusalem Talmud, but not here in the Talmud Bavli. It is stated in the Jerusalem Talmud and various midrashim, so other rabbinic writings, this episode refers to an Arab king, which explains why the high priest went out to talk to him. So it might well have been during a period in history when there was danger to the kingdom of Israel from its neighbors, and if a king happened to arrive on Yom Kippur, the high priest, as a representative of the people, was brought out to accord respect to this visiting monarch as a matter of diplomacy. And then this incident happened. No doubt the deputy high priest did not leave the temple. A little bit like this idea that, at certain times in the American government, the president, the vice president can't be in the same place just in case something happens to the one. The other is going to be prepared and ready to serve. Where am I? Okay, and the Gemara continues to discuss Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis. And they said about I just said that. And they further said about Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, and I'm almost done with what I'm covering today, so definitely get your questions and comments in. And they further said about Rabbi Yishmael ben Kimhis, once he went out and talked to a certain officer in the market, and a drop of saliva sprayed from the officer's mouth onto the clothes of Rabbi Yishmael. And his brother Yosef entered and served as high priest in his stead. And again, their mother saw two of her sons serving as high priests on a single day. Same kind of incident, but a different brother was deputy high priest, and he became the serving high priest on that day. And the sages taught in a baraisa, Kimhis had 7 sons, and they all served in the office of the high priesthood. They were all Kohen Gadol at some point in their lives, either as the appointed high priest or the deputy high priest that stepped into the role at a certain point, like Yom Kippur. And the sages said to her, "What good deeds did you perform to merit this? Like, this is extraordinary that one woman should have 7 sons, all of whom serve at some point as high priest in the temple. You must be an extraordinary woman, extraordinarily righteous. Do you have a mitzvah that is most dear to you? And perhaps that would explain why you had such a tremendous merit, right? Some mitzvah that is very dear to you and that you performed at some kind of super high level and that gave you all this merit," is what they asked her. And she said to them, "In all my days, the beams of my house never saw the braids of my hair," as she was extremely modest and was very strict about covering her hair even inside her own house. And they said to her, "Many women did so and did not succeed to such an extraordinary degree as you. You must have been granted a special gift from God." And we have a note here. Apparently, the brothers were not all the sons of a single man, which is why only the mother was praised and not the father, right? So, maybe she was a widow, or there was probably not a divorce, because all 7 sons served as high priest. So she was married to a priest both times, right? They would have to be priests. Both of her husbands had to be priests. But each of her husbands only fathered some of those 7. She mothered all 7 sons. And, just like her son ended up being so humble, she was so humble. So maybe it was this value of humility that she transmitted to her sons. Maybe that was a big part of why she had this tremendous merit. She didn't say, "Well, I worked really hard to train them to do this and to do that." She just said, "Look, you asked me about a mitzvah, I was modest. That's it. I just was very modest." They said, "Well, other women are modest too. They didn't have 7 sons who are Kohen Gadol." She says, I can't explain it. And they said, "Well, there is something extraordinary about you. God gave you some kind of a special gift." I'm saying perhaps it's some kind of extreme version of modesty and humility that was involved in giving her this tremendous merit. Okay, that's what I have for us today from the Gemara. Let's get to your comments and questions. Okay, great. Bill, does that mean that they would make a new spoon and coal pan for each new Kohen Gadol? I think that the coal pan was always the same size, right? The coal pan held 3 kav. The bigger coal pan held 6 that they would use during the year and then transfer to the greenish gold coal pan that they would use to bring coals to the incense altar in the sanctuary. But the special coal pan of Yom Kippur, was the same size, 3 kav, but they would use it even to take the coals directly from the outer altar where the big fires were, and then that gold coal pan would go into the Holy of Holies. That was always the same size. They did create a new spoon for every high priest based on the measurements of his hands, so that he would bring a handful according to what his handfuls are, but he would take that handful out of the first vessel, put it into the custom spoon for each high priest, and then he would carry that spoon along with the gold coal pan into the Holy of Holies. PK, women know how to do multiple things at the same time in the kitchen. Yes, they do. I'm always in awe of all the things that Nina balances, particularly on Fridays. as there's so much to do, getting Shabbos dinner ready and stuff with the kids and helping me feeding the questions here for the show. It's amazing. I think women probably are better at multitasking than men are. Regarding the Kohen in the marketplace, Sharon says, I thought the high priest was in seclusion on Yom Kippur, right? For 7 days, he's been sequestered in the temple compound. And now you're telling me that on Yom Kippur itself, he was out in the marketplace, and not just once, but twice. Once perhaps for this Arab king, and the other time for some kind of officer, right? And the word there is a hegemon or a hegemon. So I'm guessing language, the officer, the hegemon. From the Greek hegemon, or hegemon, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Probably Bill could help. Meaning overseer of a Roman province. It is also a title for an important minister or prince. Right. So it was not just, like the local lieutenant or captain. It was the regional governor representing the Roman Empire. So they brought out the high priest because they had no choice. No doubt they had no choice. And then having brought him out, he contracted some kind of ritual impurity. And so thank God they had their deputy high priest ready to serve. Okay, let me just check a little more because Nina had to go after she recorded those questions. Right. So Lynn is mentioning that in the Art Scroll Talmud tract, that's why I was confused before, the tractate Yoma is 2 volumes. So now we're moving into the second volume in the Art Scroll. But in the Koran, tractate Yoma is all in one book. And over there, Bill says, I've heard hegemon and hegemon, but I think the former is more correct. So hegemon, right? And is that the same word as, I don't even know how to pronounce it. That's one of those words you read and never actually say, but hegemony, right? Hegemony. Okay. That seems to be covered. That was covered. Okay. Big conversation going on. Oh, I think people are talking about this gesture, right? Which is not a gesture, right? It was just that the priest would say that this is a handful when they took the flour for the meal offering. We're going to be talking more about this in terms of the incense. We haven't quite got there yet. But so like here, the Koran even has an illustration of the hand, held in that manner. I got a big glow from the lights in here. But it's not some kind of a symbol, right? It's just that he scoops with those 3 fingers and then wipes away the excess of the flour with the pinky and the thumb. And then I think people are just talking about what that symbol means in more modern times. And then somebody's mentioning the horns of the altar. And we'll talk about more about that. I mean, we've talked quite a bit about sacrifices just in passing here in our journey through Tractate Yoma. But when we get into the actual tractates about the sacrifices themselves, then we'll learn more about the horns of the altar, the corners of the altar, which are particularly important. Here we actually are already starting to discuss it, that the priest on Yom Kippur sanctifies the altar itself by putting some of the blood of the goats and the bull on it. He's going to do that in the Holy of Holies. He's also going to do that on the incense altar, and there's going to be other rituals involving the horns of the altar. And there's also a story, right, in the book of Kings that one of the conspirators who had conspired against King David and got caught, and then he thought that he wouldn't be executed for insurrection if he was holding on to the horns of the altar. Yeah, but no, that's not going to save your life when you try to kill the king, and it didn't save him. That's a whole other story. Okay. That's what I've got for us today. My friends, Shabbos is almost here. Take the Shabbos challenge. Wherever you are in your Shabbos observance, if you're not Jewish, unplug. Just turn off technology for 25 hours. Check in with your soul. Check in with the Creator. It's such a beautiful, beautiful practice, and it's refreshing and rejuvenating. And if you're Jewish, take a little step up with your practice wherever it is. If you aren't already making Kiddush and making Motzi, add that to your Shabbos experience. Unplug, of course. If you're already Shomer Shabbos, maybe bring in Shabbos a few minutes early. Especially these days, there's a lot of danger. There's a lot of bad news in the air. I mean, at all times there's stuff going on, but especially these days, the Jews are under attack around the world. It's almost like the political situation in Israel has suddenly become a convenient excuse for the Jew haters to come out from under their rocks. This is a time for us to be proud, to be vocal, to show gratitude for all the blessings in our lives, to thank God for that, and to just step up our observance a little bit. If you're a Shomer Shabbos Jew, you've got a beautiful Shabbos table, and you know a Jew who doesn't have that in his or her life, maybe you could invite them to a Shabbos dinner soon. It's a beautiful thing to do, and it helps cure Jewish ignorance, which is just a big plague in the world. So many Jews unaware of the beauty of our tradition and what their obligations are. If you're a Jew with a Shabbos table, invite a Jew to Shabbos dinner. Nina has a beautiful letter about that that's being published in this week's Mishpacha magazine. If you happen to get that, watch for Nina's letter. That's what I've got. Have a beautiful and refreshing Shabbos.